The silence of space was profound, punctuated only by the soft hum of the spacecraft as it drifted through the Andromeda galaxy. Dr. Elliot Rowe, a human linguist and cultural specialist, meticulously scanned the vast emptiness, his eyes flicking between the screens displaying various sensor outputs. "Anything on the radar yet, Elliot?" asked Captain James Teller, a veteran of space exploration missions, his voice calm and steady over the comm system. "Still clear, Captain," Elliot responded, adjusting the dials on his instrument panel. "Wait, hold on. I'm picking up something unusual. It's a faint signal, but it's definitely artificial." "Let's get a visual on that," Captain Teller ordered. The crew of the spacecraft maneuvered their vessel towards the source of the signal. As they approached, an alien craft, angular and covered in cosmic dust, appeared on their view screen. It seemed abandoned, drifting aimlessly. "Looks old, possibly predating any known contact with alien tech," murmured Elliot, his curiosity piqued. He looked over at Lieutenant Sarah Ming, the ship's engineer, who was already preparing a boarding drone. "Can we get inside?" Elliot asked, his gaze still fixed on the screen. "We should be able to. I'll have the drone make a pass to check for entry points," Sarah replied, her fingers flying over her console. Minutes later, they had a live feed from the drone inside the alien ship. The interior was dimly lit by emergency lighting, revealing corridors filled with the echoes of a lost civilization. "Find anything resembling a control room or database, Sarah. There could be invaluable information in there," Captain Teller instructed. The drone continued its silent voyage through the corridors until it entered a chamber with cryogenic pods. One pod was still operational, its glass surface frosted but intact. "There's someone in here," Elliot exclaimed, leaning closer to the monitor. Inside the pod, a female figure could be seen, her features peaceful yet distinctly alien. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered, equally amazed. "She could be the last of her kind. We need to bring her aboard, Captain. There's a chance she could still be alive, and if she is, we might be the only chance she has," Elliot said, turning to face Captain Teller, who nodded in agreement. "Prepare the med bay and make sure quarantine protocols are in place. Elliot, you're with me. We're going to board that ship and bring her back," the captain decided. Moments later, Elliot and Captain Teller suited up and embarked on the shuttle that would take them to the alien craft. The weightlessness of space enveloped them as they maneuvered through the debris of forgotten star battles to reach the silent vessel. Once inside, they made their way to the cryogenic chamber, their steps echoing in the empty ship. Elliot approached the pod cautiously, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Reaching out, he gently wiped away the frost from the glass with his gloved hand. The alien girl inside didn't stir, her chest barely moving under her ornate garb. "We're going to get you out of here," Elliot murmured, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Working together, Elliot and Captain Teller carefully extracted the pod from its anchorage and transported it back to their ship. As the medical team prepared to revive their mysterious guest, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was about to change everything. Back aboard their own ship, with the pod securely placed in the med bay, Elliot waited anxiously. If she woke up, would she be frightened? Hostile? He practiced calming phrases in several dialects, hoping one would be familiar to her. The pod's revival systems beeped steadily, and slowly, the frost began to clear, revealing the girl's face more clearly. Her eyelids fluttered, and Elliot leaned in closer, ready to speak the first words of welcome in what he hoped would be the dead language of her ancestors. Chapter 2: Awakening. In the med bay's soft lighting, a quiet buzz of anticipation filled the air as the alien girl, now identified as Lyra, began to stir in the cryogenic pod. Dr. Elliot Rowe, Captain James Teller, and Dr. Marcus Levin, the ship's chief medical officer, stood by, watching intently as the revival process entered its final phase. "Vital signs are stabilizing. She's coming around," Dr. Levin announced, his eyes never leaving the monitors. Elliot leaned forward, his heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. He had studied dozens of ancient languages, but speaking one to a native, especially one thought extinct, was something he had never imagined. The glass lid of the pod slowly lifted with a hiss. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty. She looked around, visibly confused and scared. Her gaze fixed on Elliot, who stood closest to the pod. "Shoo, it's okay. You're safe," Elliot said softly in her ancestral tongue. Lyra's eyes widened in shock, and she responded in a flurry of rapid, lyrical sentences that Elliot struggled to follow. "Slow down, please," Elliot requested gently in the same language. His use of her tongue seemed to calm her slightly. Captain Teller stepped forward, his presence commanding yet kind. "Dr. Rowe will help you. We mean no harm," he said, speaking through a translator device. Lyra looked between the men, her breathing easing as she took in her surroundings. "Where am I? Who are you?" she asked in her language, her voice quivering. "You're aboard the human exploration vessel Horizon. I'm Elliot, this is Captain Teller and Dr. Levin. We found you adrift in space." "In stasis," Elliot explained. "And you speak my language? How is this possible?" Lyra's voice was a mix of awe and curiosity. "I've studied many languages, yours was among them. It was taught as an ancient and lost dialect at my university," Elliot replied, hoping to bridge the gap between them with his words. Lyra sat up slowly, assisted by Dr. Levin. "My people, are they?" "We don't know yet," Elliot said honestly. "But we hope to learn more from you if you're willing." Captain Teller interjected. "We're on a mission of peace and exploration. Your well-being is our priority now." Lyra nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "I will help however I can," she said, a flicker of determination crossing her features. Over the next few hours, Elliot and Lyra talked extensively. Captain Teller and Dr. Levin periodically checked in, but it was clear Lyra felt most comfortable speaking her native language with Elliot. "Tell me about your world," Lyra asked, her curiosity growing as her initial shock faded. Elliot shared stories of Earth, its diverse cultures, and the many languages spoken. He explained their mission to foster interstellar peace and understanding. Lyra listened intently, her gaze never wavering. "My world was once like that, vibrant and full of life. I hope it still is." As the day turned to evening, Captain Teller proposed a welcome meal to make Lyra feel more at home. The ship's cook prepared a variety of simple dishes, hoping something might be palatable to their guest. At the meal, Lyra tried different foods, finding some flavors strange but enjoyable. The informal setting helped relax everyone, and conversation flowed more freely. Lyra shared more about her culture and history, each detail fascinating to the crew. "I never imagined I'd be breaking bread with an alien civilization," Captain Teller remarked, a smile on his face. "And I never imagined I'd awaken among the stars, with strangers who speak my language," Lyra replied, a hint of humor in her voice. The meal ended with a tour of the ship. Elliot and Captain Teller showed Lyra the bridge, the engine room, and the research labs. "Your ship is a marvel," Lyra said, looking out at the stars from the bridge. "A testament to what your people have achieved." Elliot smiled. "And perhaps it's just the beginning of what our people can achieve together." As they returned to the med bay for her final checkup of the day, Lyra paused at the doorway. "Thank you, Elliot, Captain Teller, Dr. Levin, for saving me, and for your kindness." "We're just glad you're here, Lyra," Elliot replied, knowing this was only the start of a remarkable journey. Chapter 3: Bonds of Language. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was a constant backdrop as Elliot and Captain Teller prepared for another session with Lyra. Having spent the past few days learning more about her language, Elliot was eager to deepen their understanding of her culture and history. "Elliot, how's the glossary coming along?" Captain Teller asked, his arms folded as he leaned against the wall of the conference room. "It's growing fast," Elliot replied, scrolling through his tablet. "Lyra's been incredibly cooperative, and we're filling in gaps I never thought we'd bridge. It's not every day you get a native speaker of a dead language helping you fine-tune your work." Captain Teller chuckled. "She's making our resident linguist feel like a student again." "That's not far from the truth," Elliot admitted with a grin. I've spent years piecing together fragments from ruins and ancient star charts, but speaking to her, really speaking to her, has opened up entire new avenues of understanding. As if on cue, Lyra entered the room, her bearing graceful and her curiosity ever present. She offered a small smile to both men before taking a seat. "Good morning," she said in her native tongue, a phrase Elliot had coached her to say as a kind of linguistic icebreaker. Elliot returned her greeting in the same language, his accent improving with each exchange. "I was just reviewing our notes from yesterday. The words you taught me for different star systems, they're tied to specific myths and legends, aren't they?" Lyra nodded. "Yes. My people believed that each star held a story, a fragment of our ancestors' lives. To map the stars was to map our history." Captain Teller leaned forward, intrigued. "So the names aren't just coordinates. They carry meaning." "Exactly," Lyra said, switching to Galactic Common with some effort. "Our navigation was intertwined with our culture. A pilot didn't simply follow a path. They followed a legacy." Elliot tapped his chin thoughtfully. "If we could document those myths, we might be able to reconstruct parts of your star charts. It could help us find surviving settlements or lost archives." Lyra's expression turned contemplative. "It's possible, but I'll need more time to remember. Much of that knowledge was passed down orally, and I've been asleep for a long time." "Take your time," Elliot said gently. "We're not in any rush." Captain Teller nodded in agreement. "We're here to support you, Lyra. Whatever you need, just let us know." As the session continued, Elliot and Lyra worked through a series of terms and phrases that had baffled linguists for decades. Each word revealed subtle nuances in meaning that hinted at a complex society deeply connected to its environment and history. Elliot took careful notes, occasionally pausing to ask Lyra for clarification. "Why did your people have 3 different words for journey?" he asked at one point, genuinely curious. Lyra smiled faintly. "Because not all journeys are the same. One word was for a journey of discovery, another for a journey of necessity, and the third for a journey of return. Each carried its own connotations." "That's fascinating," Captain Teller said, leaning back in his chair. "Our own language has evolved over time, but I can't say we've ever had such precise distinctions for something like that." Lyra tilted her head. "Perhaps it reflects our values. For my people, every journey had a purpose. Even if it was a simple trip to another village, it held meaning." Elliot nodded, scribbling down her explanation. "It's like capturing the spirit of the journey, not just the act of traveling. I wonder if we can incorporate that perspective into how we map the stars now." By the time their session ended, Elliot and Captain Teller were more immersed in Lyra's world than ever. The 3 of them had formed a bond through their collaborative work, with Lyra teaching and the 2 humans eagerly learning. "Thank you for sharing so much with us," Elliot said as Lyra rose to leave. She paused at the door, her expression soft. "It's a gift to know that my language is not forgotten. Perhaps, through you, it will live again." Her words hung in the air long after she left, a reminder of the incredible journey they had just begun. Chapter 4. The Cultural Exchange. The main conference room aboard the Horizon was buzzing with activity. Crew members filed in, eager to meet the alien girl who had sparked so much curiosity. Elliot and Captain Teller stood at the front of the room, reviewing the notes they had prepared for Lyra's introduction to the rest of the crew. "She's a bit nervous," Elliot said, glancing at his datapad. "This is the first time she'll be addressing more than just the 2 of us." "She'll be fine," Captain Teller reassured him. "From what I've seen, Lyra's sharper and more adaptable than most diplomats I've worked with." Elliot nodded, although he couldn't help but feel a slight twinge of anxiety. Lyra's comfort was paramount, and he didn't want her to feel overwhelmed. When Lyra arrived, a hush fell over the room. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her delicate features framed by her flowing, silvery hair. Her eyes, luminous and reflective, scanned the room as she took in the diverse faces of the human crew. The translator device clipped to her collar was active, but she had been practicing enough of the common language to speak without it for most simple conversations. "Good morning," Lyra began, her voice steady. "I thank you for welcoming me aboard your ship. I hope to share with you what I know, and in turn, learn from you as well." There was a polite round of applause. Elliot stepped forward, ready to help guide the conversation if needed. Lyra comes from a civilization that valued knowledge and understanding above all else. Today, she's here to answer your questions and help us better understand her culture. A hand shot up from the engineering team. "How advanced was your technology compared to ours?" Lyra tilted her head slightly, considering the question. "It's difficult to compare. Our focus was not on building weapons or expanding territories, but rather on improving quality of life. We used energy systems that harmonized with our environment, and we sought sustainable solutions. Perhaps in some ways we were more advanced, but in others, I see that humanity has achieved remarkable things." Another crew member, a young linguist named Niles, raised his hand. "Is it true that your language had no written form? How did you preserve knowledge?" "We did have writing," Lyra replied, "but much of our most important knowledge was passed down through oral tradition. Our stories, our laws, our science, they were memorized by trained scholars and recited at gatherings. It kept our history alive and allowed us to adapt our understanding as our world changed." Captain Teller leaned in. "What about trade? Did your people engage in commerce with other civilizations?" Lyra's expression grew more thoughtful. "Trade was less about profit and more about relationships. We exchanged resources and knowledge, not to accumulate wealth, but to strengthen alliances. Sharing was a means of building trust and fostering cooperation." As the questions continued, the atmosphere grew increasingly relaxed. Lyra's composed yet warm demeanor put everyone at ease, and soon the conversation felt more like a friendly discussion. Elliot watched with a sense of pride as she handled each inquiry gracefully, bridging the gap between two vastly different cultures. After the formal Q&A session, the group broke up into smaller clusters to continue the conversation. Elliot found himself sitting with Lyra and Captain Teller at one of the tables, sipping a cup of tea while Lyra sampled a plate of various earth fruits. "These are surprisingly sweet," she commented, holding up a slice of mango. "On my world, most fruits were sour or bitter. We'll have to stock up on mangoes, then," Captain Teller said with a chuckle. Lyra smiled, her gaze flickering between Elliot and the captain. "It's fascinating to see how different your tastes and customs are from what I knew. Even something as simple as a meal can tell so much about your values and experiences." Elliot nodded. "Food has always been a form of communication. It's a way to bring people together, to share a piece of who you are." "You speak as though your people are so different from mine," Lyra said, her tone growing more reflective. "But the more I learn, the more I see the similarities. The way you value knowledge, the way you gather to share stories, the way you care for one another. It's not so unlike what I remember." Captain Teller leaned back, resting his arm on the chair. "I think that's what makes exploration so worthwhile. Finding those common threads reminds us that we're not alone in the universe." Lyra looked at Elliot, her expression softening. "It's strange, but I feel comfortable here, among your people. I never expected that." Elliot smiled. "We're glad you're here, Lyra. We have a lot to learn from each other." The conversation flowed late into the evening. As they shared more stories and observations, the bond between Lyra, Elliot, and Captain Teller grew stronger. It was a new chapter not only in interstellar relations, but in the personal connections that would shape their journey ahead. Chapter 5: Hidden Truths. Elliot sat at the ship's central database terminal, flipping through the fragments of data they had recovered from Lyra's vessel. Next to him, Lyra and Captain Teller leaned in, scanning the scrolling text and faint holograms. "It's mostly corrupted," Elliot muttered. "We only managed to salvage portions of the navigational logs and a few snippets of what look like personal journals. I've been cross-referencing the language to match the terms Lyra's taught me." Lyra pointed to a section of text on the screen. "That symbol there, it's the word for refuge. This isn't just a ship log. It's part of a much larger archive." "Refuge?" Captain Teller asked, furrowing his brow. Are you saying this wasn't just a transport ship? No, Lyra confirmed, her voice quiet but steady. This was one of many vessels that carried survivors away from our homeworld during the fall. Elliot and Teller exchanged a look. What exactly happened? Elliot asked gently. Lyra hesitated, her expression troubled. She drew a slow breath before answering. We were not conquerors, not in the way some civilizations expand. We believed in maintaining balance, in living alongside the cosmos rather than bending it to our will. But there were others who saw our knowledge as a threat. Alliances formed against us. They wanted to control what we knew, to keep us silent. And they came for you, Elliot guessed. Lyra nodded. There was no single invasion or decisive battle. It was more subtle than that. Our trade routes were cut off. Communications were intercepted. Rumors spread that we were dangerous, that our wisdom would destabilize the galaxy. By the time the first attacks came, we were already divided, isolated. Captain Teller crossed his arms. So they dismantled your civilization piece by piece. Yes, Lyra replied softly. We tried to preserve what we could. Records were stored on ships like the one you found me on. Some of us volunteered for stasis, hoping to awaken when it was safe again. Elliot leaned back in his chair, staring at the flickering holograms. And instead, your ship drifted for who knows how long. Centuries, Lyra said, her voice tinged with both sadness and awe. I never thought I'd wake up to find my... Captain Teller placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're not alone anymore. Whatever happened back then, we're here now. Maybe we can help you find out what really happened, or at least piece together the truth. Lyra offered a faint smile. Thank you. I'd like that. Elliot tapped a few keys on the console, bringing up another section of recovered data. Look at this, he said, pointing to a series of star charts. These are old routes, but some of them match known regions of space. If we can figure out the coordinates, we might locate other ships or archives that survived. Lyra leaned closer, her interest clearly piqued. That symbol there, see? It's a reference to a gathering point. If others survived, they would have gone there. Captain Teller nodded. Let's cross-check these coordinates with the ship's current navigation systems. If there's even a chance that more of your people's history is out there, it's worth investigating. I agree, Elliot said. We'll map these routes and see if we can find any active signals. Lyra, you'll help us interpret the data. Of course, she said without hesitation. The three of them spent the next several hours combing through the remaining files, deciphering fragments of text, and overlaying the ancient star maps onto the current galactic charts. It was slow, painstaking work, but with every step, they drew closer to understanding what had happened, and what might still be waiting to be discovered. As the hours stretched into the ship's evening cycle, the trio took a break in the common area. Lyra sat quietly, sipping a cup of something warm, while Elliot and Captain Teller discussed their next steps at a nearby table. She's holding up well, considering everything, Captain Teller said quietly. Elliot glanced over at Lyra, who was staring out a small viewport at the stars. She's remarkably strong. I can't imagine waking up to find your entire world gone. It's a heavy burden, Teller agreed, but I think she's finding some solace in having people to share it with. Elliot nodded, lost in thought. I just hope we can help her find some answers. Lyra turned her gaze back to them and smiled faintly. You're helping more than you know. Together, we might yet uncover the truth. Chapter 6. A Galactic Revelation. The bridge was alive with activity as Elliot, Lyra, and Captain Teller reviewed the findings from their latest charting session. A newly decrypted set of coordinates led to a location on the outer edge of the known galaxy, a system rich in ancient ruins and remnants of long-abandoned settlements. The prospect of uncovering more artifacts, or perhaps even intact data archives, had everyone on edge. We're coming up on the coordinates, announced Lieutenant Sarah Ming from the helm. Her hands moved swiftly over the console, dropping out of hyperspace in 3, 2, 1. The stars outside the viewport stretched and then snapped into focus. A desolate planet filled the screen, its surface marked by vast canyons and eroded structures. Elliot leaned closer to the display. That's not natural. Those formations, look at the symmetry. Those are ruins. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the planet below. I recognized that architecture. My people called it the Hall of Echoes. It was one of our most revered sites. Captain Teller folded his arms. Why was it abandoned? During the fall, it became too dangerous to maintain, Lyra explained, her voice tinged with regret. But many of our records were kept there. If any survived, they'll be in the central vaults. Teller turned to the crew. Prep a shuttle. Elliot, you and Lyra are going down there. Take a small team and see what you can find. Ming, you're in charge while I'm gone. Elliot raised an eyebrow. You're coming with us, Captain? Damn right I am, Teller said. If there's a chance to find something that important, I'm not sitting it out. The shuttle's engines roared as it descended through the thin atmosphere, kicking up a haze of reddish dust. The ruins came into view, massive stone columns rising like skeletal fingers from the barren landscape. The structures bore intricate carvings, their surfaces weathered but still discernible. Elliot adjusted his helmet and checked his translator device. The language on these walls, this predates most of the records we've seen so far. It might be the original script. Lyra nodded. Yes, this is how we recorded our earliest stories. The Hall of Echoes was meant to be a place where anyone could come to learn from our past. Teller motioned for the team to spread out. Keep your eyes open. We don't know what condition these ruins are in, or if anyone else has been here. As they moved deeper into the complex, the air grew cooler, the sunlight giving way to shadows. Elliot's fingers traced the carvings on a nearby column. This phrase here, the voice within the stars, what does that mean? It refers to the ancestral knowledge, Lyra explained. Our people believed that the stars themselves carried our history, and that the Hall of Echoes was a place where those voices could be heard. Elliot's curiosity deepened. It's almost poetic, a repository of knowledge that's tied directly to the cosmos. It was our way of ensuring that no matter what happened, our stories would endure, Lyra said, her tone solemn. Teller, who had been scanning the area, called out. Over here, I think I found the central vault. They gathered in front of a massive doorway, its surface engraved with symbols that glowed faintly as Lyra approached. She placed her hand on the door, and a soft hum filled the air. It's still active, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. These vaults were designed to recognize our biosignatures. Elliot stepped back as the door slid open, revealing a chamber filled with crystalline storage units. The light from their suits reflected off the surfaces, casting shimmering patterns on the walls. This is incredible, Elliot said. It's all intact. Lyra walked slowly among the crystals, her fingers hovering just above them. Each of these contains a piece of our knowledge, our history, our technology, our culture. It's more than I ever hoped to find. Teller gestured to a technician. Start recording everything. We need to catalog this carefully. As the team worked, Elliot and Lyra moved to a console at the center of the room. Lyra tapped a series of symbols, bringing up holographic displays of star charts, scientific texts, and art pieces. This, she said, pointing to one display, is a map of the known galaxy as it was before the fall. It shows the location of other archives and settlements. If we follow these paths, we might find more survivors or at least more records. Elliot felt a surge of excitement. This could change everything. It's not just a collection of data, it's a connection to your people's legacy. If we share this with the rest of the galaxy. Lyra turned to him, her eyes meeting his. It's not just my people's legacy. It belongs to everyone now. If humanity is willing to listen, then perhaps together we can rebuild something greater. Teller, overhearing, nodded. We'll make sure it's shared responsibly. This knowledge could help us all move forward. As the team continued their work, the sense of purpose in the room was palpable. They were no longer just explorers or researchers. They were the bridge between an ancient civilization and the present, piecing together a story that had been lost for generations. Elliot couldn't help but feel a deep connection to Lyra. Together, they were part of something far larger than themselves, and the discoveries they made here would resonate across the galaxy. Chapter 7. The Whisper of Peace. The Starship Horizon floated above a verdant planet, its emerald oceans and lush forests sparkling under a trio of suns. The crew had spent the last several days meticulously analyzing the data recovered from the Hall of Echoes. Now Elliot, Lyra, and Captain Teller stood in the briefing room, poring over holographic projections of a complex star map. "This system here," Elliot said, pointing to a cluster of stars marked with the faint glow of ancient glyphs, "matches the coordinates we found in the vault. If our interpretation is correct, it's where one of the last peace councils of Lyra's people convened." Lyra leaned in, studying the map closely. "That council was the cornerstone of our philosophy. If there's any chance we can recover the records from that gathering, it could teach all of us how to mediate conflicts on a galactic scale." Teller crossed his arms. "The problem is that region's controlled by a coalition that's not exactly friendly to outsiders. We'll have to tread carefully." Elliot nodded. "We're not looking to start trouble. We just need to approach this diplomatically. Lyra, if you can help us craft a message that shows them we mean no harm, we might gain their trust." Lyra considered his words. "I can try. My language and the Council's teachings were designed to foster understanding. If I can convey that sincerity, perhaps they'll let us retrieve what we need." Teller's brow furrowed. "That's assuming they haven't completely abandoned the Council's ideals. If they see you as a threat, they might not even let us through the door." "We'll have to convince them otherwise," Elliot said. "If we present ourselves as allies rather than intruders, they might listen." Teller rubbed his chin. "It's risky, but it's the best plan we've got. I'll authorize the jump to their system, but we're going in unarmed. If they don't want us there, we back off." When the Horizon emerged from hyperspace, it was immediately greeted by a swarm of small, sleek patrol ships. The Coalition forces sent a hail, their stern faces appearing on the main view screen. "This is restricted space," a gravelly-voiced alien commander said. "You have no authorization to enter." Lyra stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "Commander, I am Lyra of the—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "The custodians of the Hall of Echoes. I have come to retrieve what remains of our shared heritage." The commander frowned, clearly unimpressed. "Heritage or not, you cannot." "Please," Elliot interjected. "We understand your concerns, but we're here to uncover knowledge that could benefit everyone. The teachings from that council were meant to prevent conflict, not create it. Surely that's a cause worth supporting." The commander narrowed his eyes. "How can we trust that you won't take this information and use it against us?" Lyra stepped closer to the screen. "If you believe nothing else, believe this. My people's greatest desire was peace. I was there and I remember. We built the Council's archives so that no civilization would have to suffer alone. If you let us access it, I promise we will share what we find, openly and without deceit." There was a long pause as the commander considered her words. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. You'll be allowed entry, but only under our supervision. If we see any sign of treachery, you'll be removed immediately." "We understand," Teller said. "Thank you for allowing us this opportunity." The landing party consisted of Lyra, Elliot, Captain Teller, and a small escort. The Coalition forces had assigned their own guards to ensure compliance, but they allowed the Horizons team to work freely within the Council's crumbling halls. It was clear that the once grand chamber had fallen into disrepair, but the central archives still glowed faintly, protected by ancient fail-safe systems. Elliot carefully activated the console, his fingers moving across the holographic interface. "It's all here," he murmured. The original Council's decisions, their methods of negotiation, the frameworks they used to mediate disputes, it's incredibly detailed. Lyra's eyes shone with a mix of pride and sorrow. "This was the heart of our ideals. If we can learn from these records, we could teach others how to avoid the mistakes that destroyed my people." As Elliot downloaded the data, Captain Teller kept a watchful eye on the Coalition guards. They were tense but didn't interfere. Teller approached their commander cautiously. "You know," Teller said, "this could be the start of something bigger. If we can understand each other better, maybe we won't always be at each other's throats." The alien commander eyed him warily but said nothing. Elliot's voice broke the silence. "I've got everything. Let's head back." The group returned to the horizon, the data safely stored and the coalition escort ensuring their departure. Once on board, the crew gathered in the observation lounge to review what they had recovered. "This could redefine how we approach interstellar diplomacy," Elliot said, scrolling through the translated documents. "It's not just rules and regulations. It's a philosophy of mutual respect and understanding. If we can adapt these principles, we might just have a chance at lasting peace." Lyra sat beside him, her expression hopeful. "It's more than I could have hoped for. Together, we can ensure that my people's legacy isn't forgotten, that it becomes a foundation for a better future." Captain Teller, leaning back in his chair, gave a rare smile. "Well, we've got a long way to go, but this is a hell of a start." Chapter 8. A New Dawn. Back on the horizon, the crew worked tirelessly to sift through the vast trove of knowledge recovered from the Council's archives. Lyra spent hours translating the intricacies of her people's philosophy and dispute resolution techniques, while Elliot and Captain Teller focused on finding practical ways to adapt those principles for current galactic relations. One evening, the three of them sat around the large conference table in the main briefing room. Holographic displays of ancient symbols and modern translations flickered before them. Captain Teller leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "So, what's the next step? We've got all this knowledge, but how do we get anyone to actually use it?" Lyra folded her hands in front of her. "We start small. Share the simplest methods, basic guidelines for negotiations that anyone can understand. Once we show that these principles work, others will begin to trust the larger philosophy." Elliot nodded. "That makes sense. If we try to introduce it all at once, it might seem overwhelming, even suspicious. But if we can demonstrate how effective these strategies are in a few key situations, like a pilot program," Teller interjected, "we find a conflict that's still smoldering, something not yet on the verge of war, and use these methods to settle it." Lyra's gaze was steady. "I can help identify the right candidates. My people faced countless disputes among ourselves and with neighboring civilizations. Some of the records include case studies that mirror what we're seeing in the galaxy today." Elliot pulled up one such case. "This one," he said, pointing to a holographic panel. "A resource conflict between two neighboring planets. The Council created a neutral zone, implemented shared governance, and established periodic exchanges of cultural representatives. Both sides eventually thrived." Teller nodded slowly. "If we can adapt that model to a current dispute, it could set a precedent. But it'll take more than one example," Elliot added. "If we really want these ideas to take hold, we need to train others to use them." Lyra's expression brightened. "What if we establish a new council? Not one tied to any single power or government, but a body dedicated solely to preserving peace through dialogue." Teller smirked. "You're thinking big, Lyra." "Why not?" she replied. "We have the foundation. My people's philosophy was always about collaboration. This new council wouldn't replace governments or existing alliances. It would simply provide a neutral space where conflicts could be resolved before they escalate." Elliot's eyes lit up. "And you'd be the perfect one to lead it. With your knowledge and perspective, you could guide this council, teach others how to mediate." Lyra hesitated. "It's an enormous responsibility." Teller leaned forward, his tone firm. "You've already been doing it. Sharing your wisdom, teaching us your ways, that's leadership. And honestly, you're the best chance we've got." After a moment's thought, Lyra gave a slow nod. "If this is the way to honor my people's memory and ensure their teachings continue to benefit others, then I'll do it." Over the following months, Elliot, Lyra, and Captain Teller worked together to turn the vision of a new interstellar council into a reality. They reached out to peaceful coalitions, independent planets, and influential leaders across multiple sectors. Using the principles from the council archives, They demonstrated how conflicts could be resolved without bloodshed. Lyra became the public face of the initiative, her eloquence and sincerity winning over skeptics. Elliot served as her advisor, helping to adapt the ancient teachings to modern contexts, while Teller provided the diplomatic and logistical expertise needed to navigate the often chaotic world of galactic politics. The first major success came when two rival mining corporations, long at odds over a mineral-rich asteroid belt, agreed to sit down at the Council's newly established neutral station. With Lyra mediating and Elliot presenting the adapted Council principles, the two factions reached a groundbreaking agreement. The deal not only ended decades of tension, but also set the stage for a cooperative effort that benefited both parties. From there, the Council's reputation grew. Other disputes, some long-standing, others more recent, were brought before Lyra and her team. With each success, more civilizations began to trust the process and the principles behind it. One day, as the horizon cruised toward another diplomatic summit, Elliot found himself alone on the observation deck. He gazed out at the endless sea of stars, thinking about how much had changed since they had first discovered Lyra. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Lyra entering the room. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Of course not," Elliot replied, gesturing to the seat beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the stars casting a gentle glow on their faces. "You've come a long way," Elliot finally said. "I mean, we all have, but you've taken on so much." Lyra smiled faintly. "It's more than I ever imagined. When I first woke up, I thought I was alone, that my people's knowledge was lost. But now, it's alive again, through all of you. And you've given us something incredible," Elliot said. "A chance to build something better." Lyra met his gaze. "And we've done it together." For the first time, Elliot allowed himself to truly feel the weight of what they had accomplished. Not just the knowledge they had preserved, but the relationships they had formed and the future they were shaping. With Lyra beside him and Captain Teller leading their next mission, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before.